As the police cautiously entered the creepy property, a foul smell filled the air, making them uneasy. As they searched, they stumbled upon a horrifying scene: numerous bodies hidden beneath the house. Each victim had met a violent end: suffocation, stabbings, and signs of sexual assault. Upon investigation, this chilling discovery unfolded at 8215 Summerdale Avenue, known ominously as John Wayne Gacy's house. Welcome to the 11th episode of Coffee42, which is titled Case 1: John Wayne Gacy. We have a new type of series that is murder cases. We will dive into various crime cases whether they are solved or not. I'm going to avoid saying the K word since YouTube flags this word, therefore, I'm going to replace it with murder. We're going to dive into the life of the murderer clown, Pogo the Clown, or as we know, John Wayne Gacy. We'll learn about his childhood, adulthood, the murders, until his execution. Grab your snacks, coffee, or whatever, because it's going to be a long episode. This episode includes sensitive information about murder and assault. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, to John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson. He was the middle child in the family, having an older sister, Joanne, who was 2 years older, and a younger sister, Karen, who was 2 years younger. John Wayne Gacy grew up in a middle working class environment or neighborhood. However, it was common for children to take part time jobs, which John pursued, such as being a bag boy at a grocery store. He also did some time in Boy Scouting. John was close to his mother and sister. However, he had a poor relationship with his father. John Stanley Gacy, the father, was an auto repair mechanist. However, he was also an abusive and alcoholic person. He used to sit around at home drinking and would casually call his son Sissy, compare his son to his daughters, and at times being physically abusive with his son. The earliest memory that was dated by John is when he was 4 years old. His father hit him for accidentally discharging a car engine component. This abuse was believed to mostly be done in the basement, where John would try to help his father in some house repair. In 1949, when John was 7 years old, he was whipped by his father for catching John and another boy trying to sexually fondle a young girl. Also in 1949, John was occasionally being molested by a family friend. John endured this due to the fact that he was scared to tell his father about this, and John being blamed for it, and at the end being physically abused for it. However, after all these challenges that occurred between John and his father's relationship, he still loved his father and mentioned that he was like never good enough at his father's eyes. In 1953, when John was 11 years old, while playing in the park by the swings, John got hit by one of the swings in the head. That caused a blood clot to develop in his brain. This caused him to suffer a series of unexplained blackouts for 5 years, until the blood clot was discovered in 1958, when John was 16 years old. John was an overweight kid and didn't enjoy sports as much. This was also said due to his heart condition, which he was told to avoid sports. And in 1959, when John was 17 years old, he suffered from a heart ailment, getting hospitalized numerous times. However, this heart ailment was never located exactly in the body, and John never suffered a heart attack from it. However, his father believed that John was faking his conditions and would openly say it to him as John was laying in the hospital bed. In 1960, at the age of 18, John found a job as an assistant for the precinct captain. In the same year, his father bought him a car, which John was paying his father the full amount back over time. However, his father kept confiscating the car keys when John would be disobedient to him and not do what his father tells him. John failed to graduate high school. However, he attended the Northwestern Business School in Chicago. He managed to graduate from it and worked as a salesman and a manager at a shoe company. And in 1964, he met his first wife, Marilyn Myers, and eventually marrying her after 9 months from meeting her. Marilyn's father owned some KFC chains in Waterloo, Iowa. and asked John, his son in law, if he would help him and work in his chains. John accepted and began to work there as a manager. However, it was said later on that Merlin's father didn't really trust John after discovering about his untrustworthiness. However, John proved him wrong by working hard and being competent. He relocated from Illinois to Waterloo to work there with his wife. After 2 years of being together in 1966, they welcomed their firstborn, a son. They named him Michael Gacy. And just over a year later, 1967, they welcomed their second-born, a daughter, and named her Christine Gacy. As his daughter turned one in 1968, her father John was charged with an offense after paying a 16-year-old boy for sodomy, or in other words, to have intercourse with him. And on top of that, he paid another boy to beat up the 16-year-old boy. Due to this, in December of 1968, he was sentenced to 10 years in Iowa State Reformatory. His wife Marilyn filed for divorce, and it was finalized in September of the following year, 1969. It was reported that in the reformatory center, he avoided homosexual inmates and was going around saying to other inmates that he was falsely accused, and he had been framed by people who were out for him and want to see him fail. It was said that he risen in the ranks there, being a model prisoner within months of being there. He had risen in the ranks to become the head cook. He would also oversee projects and help improve the reformatory center. And in Christmas of 1970, John received a terrible news about the death of his father. It was said that John collapsed and fell on the floor, crying. He requested for a supervised leave to attend his father's funeral. However, it was denied. John only served for 18 months, almost 9 years less than the original sentence, which was 10 years. After his 18-month sentence, John was granted parole with 12 months of probation in 1970. Some of the rules that came with the probation is a 10 p.m. curfew, relocation from Waterloo back to Illinois, and live with his mother. John found a job shortly later as a cook. It was reported that he was respected by his neighbors. However, they were clueless about what was lurking next to them. John didn't learn from his past mistakes and yet again went around searching for young boys. And a year after his release in 1971, he was charged with sexually assaulting a teenage boy. The boy told the police that he was lured by John into his car, took him back to his house, and John was attempting to sexually assault him. However, the complaint was dismissed when the boy failed to appear in court. And in the same year of 1971, another boy filed a complaint about being lured by John into his car, taken back to his home, and sexually assault him. It was reported that John was capable to lure these kids into his car by using a fake badge that he had in his possession. However, the second complaint was dismissed too, due to the boy attempting to blackmail John. In the same year of 1971, with the approval of his probation officer, John established a construction business called PDM, which is an abbreviation of painting, decorating, and maintenance. This business was a part time thing for John, where he worked in the morning as a cook and in the evening as a constructor. The Iowa board dismissed all records of John's history with sexual assaults and granted him a parole in October of 1971. Then, in November of 1971, his records were sealed, making them unavailable to the public. With the help of his mother, John was able to buy a ranch house, which he lived there with his mother and second wife. On July of 1972, John married his second wife, Carol Hoff, who he briefly dated in high school. However, Carol was unaware of John's past offense. Carol was a divorcee having two young daughters, and it was said that their stepfather John was nice to them. After a while of his mother living with them, she eventually moved out. The couple hosted parties that were attended by the entire neighborhood, including political and social figures. However, the couple's relationship didn't go as smooth as they wished. Due to John always being away, and being in the garage when he's back at home, neglecting his wife and stepchildren. John and an employee under PDM went to Florida to view a house that John bought. John sexually assaulted the boy, which later on the boy refused to stay in the hotel room and slept at the beach. It was said that when they returned to Chicago, the boy went to John's house and beat him up. John's mother in law saw that and stopped the boy from further any beatings, and the boy left. However, when he was asked by his wife on why the boy beat him up, John said that it was due to him refusing to pay the boy for poor quality work. John climbed up the ranks in this town, becoming a well known contractor due to him giving free contract and consultancy to political and social members, which allowed him to get appointed to serve in the Norwood Park Township Street Lighting Committee. In 1975, John informed his wife about him being bisexual, and he also informed her that it will be the last time that he'll be intimate with her. This is the same time that he would start to spend most of the nights away from home, doing whatever and only coming back home early morning. Carol, John's wife, would also see her husband bring young boys back, find gay explicit magazine and men's wallet in the garage with IDs in them. After his wife confronted him about her findings and demanded answer, he got angry and told her that it was none of her business. In the same year of 1975, Carol asked John for a divorce, which he agreed to. She continued to live in the same house until 1976, when the divorce was finalized. Furthermore, in the same year of 1975, John was yet again appointed to a new position, which was the director of Chicago's annual Polish Constitution Day parade. He supervised the parade from 1975 up to 1978, and throughout this supervision, he met and was photographed by then the First Lady, Rosalynn Carter. And in the picture, John was seen wearing a special clearance badge provided by the Secret Service, which was later on an embarrassment after the Secret Service caught John for murder. John also joined a Jolly Joker clown club, where the members would dress up as clowns and perform at fundraising events, parades, and hospitals. Through this, John took on the character which till today strikes fear in everybody's body whenever mentioned, Pogo the Clown. John made his costume and would perform at multiple children parties. The children would enjoy this clown character and humor. However, they didn't know the sinful intention that he had while playing with them. Now let's go back in time and talk about John's first murder. In January of 1972, John picked up a 15-year-old boy named Timothy Jack McCoy. The boy was on a sightseeing tour in Chicago. John picked him up from the bus terminal and drove him back to his house, where he promised to take the boy back to the bus terminal in time for him to catch the bus. However, while John was sleeping, he claimed that he suddenly awoke the following morning to find the boy standing in the hallway with a kitchen knife. John leaped over, but the boy was already swinging and he managed to just cut John's forearm. John retaliated by grabbing the knife, banging the boy's head into the bed wall, kicked him against the wardrobe, and after all that, he walked to the boy, kicked him again in the stomach, and stabbed him repeatedly in the chest. John claimed that when he went to the kitchen, he saw the table already set for two, and ingredients on the counter such as egg and bacon. The boy went to the room with the intention of waking John up with the knife in his hand. Therefore, the story has two conflicting sides, whether it was the boy or John who started the fight. The boy was buried in the crawl space, and later on, his grave would be filled with concrete. This crawl space would later on be used as a burial for every John's victims. In an interview after the arrest of John, he had mentioned that he had experienced orgasm as he murdered the boy. He too mentioned that then and there he realized death was the ultimate thrill. The second murder took place in 1974 with one of his PDM employees. The employee was an 18-year-old boy who John lured back to his house with a promise to discuss about overdue payments. John gave the boy alcohol, managed to trick him into wearing handcuffs, a trick that John would regularly use in the future, and then proceed to strangle him. He stuffed the boy's body in the closet prior to burying him. John stated that the boy's mouth and nose would leak with fluid while he was in the closet, and it also stained his carpet. From this incident, John started to put a cloth covering the holes where fluids would leak from in the future of his next victims. The boy this time was buried in the barbecue pit in John's backyard, and in 1975, John's business saw a booming and kept expanding rapidly. Therefore, he increased the number of employees. Mostly these employees consisted of high schoolers or young boys. One of the boys, Anthony Antonucci, a 15-year-old boy, whom John hired in the same year of 1975. John decided to visit the boy at his residence while he was alone. John gave the boy alcohol, whistled the boy to the floor, and managed to handcuff him. While John was away from the room, the boy set himself free. When John came back, the boy attacked John, knocking him to the floor and managing to handcuff John. As John was laying on the floor, he was threatening the boy, but after calming down, he promised the boy that he would leave him alone and not come back. The boy let John loose, and John kept his promise. However, before leaving, he told the boy, and I quote, "Not only are you the only one who got out of the cuffs, you got them on me." A week later, after this incident, another PDM employee went missing, a 17-year-old boy named John Betkovich. It was reported that the boy threatened John for weeks due to outstanding pay. Therefore, John used the trick of luring him in by promising to pay the overdue wages. When the boy arrived, John managed to handcuff him, strangle him to death, and buried the boy under the concrete floor in the garage. John later stated that he would sit on the kid's chest for a while before murdering them. The boy's car was found in an empty parking lot, abandoned, with his wallet in it. When the boy's father called John, John had told the father that he would be happy to help search the missing son. The police took John for questioning, however, he had stated that the boy and two of his friends came to him for overdue pay, but all three left with an agreement being reached. However, the parents insisted on the police to investigate with John for more than 100 times. However, it was either dismissed or they would file nothing against him. John went on a murdering spree in 1976, where he murdered numerous individuals in this year alone. After John's divorce in 1976, John was able to abduct and murder an 18-year-old boy called Daryl Sampson. John abducted another boy 5 years later, a 15-year-old boy named Randall Riffett. The boy was abducted while walking back from school. John murdered the boy by gagging him with cloth, causing him to die from asphyxiation. Hours after that, he abducted and murdered another boy, a 14-year-old named Samuel Stapleton. The boy was abducted while walking back from his sister's apartment. Both Daryl and Randall were buried in the same grave located in the crawl space. A month later, John murdered a 17-year-old boy named Michael Bonin, and he was also buried in the crawl space. 10 days later, another 16-year-old boy named William Carroll was murdered and was buried under John's kitchen. Two unidentified individuals were murdered around the same month. One boy's age ranging from 15 to 17, and the other one ranging from 25 to 30. On August of the same year, 1976, John allowed his new PDM employee to stay with him, an 18-year-old boy named David Cram. The following day, John handcuffed the boy and told him that he was going to sexually assault him. However, the boy spent time in the army, therefore, he had experience in combat fighting. The boy managed to kick John and free himself. A month later, while the boy was still in John's house, he woke up with John standing in the bedroom door. He proceeded to tell the boy, and I quote, "Dave, don't you know who I am? Maybe it would be good if you give me what I want." His second attempt to sexually assault the boy was a fail, and David moved out and left John's company. On October of 1976, John abducted and murdered two teenage boys named Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino. Both boys were strangled and buried in the crawl space. And 2 days later, another 19-year-old employee, William Bundy, was strangled to death and buried in the crawl space after telling his parents that he's attending a party. The total murders of John in 1976 was 14 victims in total, all ranging from 14 up to 13 years old. In the year of 1977, John was hired as a construction supervisor for a firm, which is specialized in nationwide remodeling of drugstores. John would regularly travel out of states. This allowed for his business to be even more successful. By 1977, PDM already had remodeled over 80 buildings. In the same year, too, John became temporarily engaged to a woman he had been dating for 3 months. She moved into his house, however, by mutual agreement, they decided to cancel the engagement and she eventually moved out. After a month, in April of 1977, John murdered another boy named Matthew Bowman at Crystal Lake. He buried him in the crawl space. In August of the same year, a clue emerged from the disappearance of one of the boys, who was missing since 1976. John was arrested trying to steal petrol from a petrol station, and the car plate number was traced back to that boy. John stated that the boy sold him his car in 1976 because he needed the cash to leave the town immediately. Therefore, the police didn't arrest John that day. And in October of 1977, another four boys were strangled to death and buried in crawl space. On December 30th, 1977, John abducted and tortured a student named Robert Donnelly. John was questioned about the assault, but no charges were filed. John targeted a young boy, Jeffrey Rignall, in March of 1978, who survived the brutal assault and helped in identifying John after his arrest. After his crawl space was filled, John began disposing bodies in the river. John confessed to throwing 5 bodies into the river by 1978, but only four were found. On December 11th, 1978, John visited a Des Plaines pharmacy, whom he was hired by to discuss a potential remodeling deal. While discussing the deal, a young 15-year-old boy named Robert Jerome overheard. After John left the store, Robert told his mother that some contractor wanted to talk to the boy about a job. Robert left the store, promising to return shortly. When Robert failed to return, his family filed a missing person report for the son with the Des Plaines police. The pharmacy owner named John Wayne Gacy as the contractor, most likely Robert left with to discuss about the job. John denied talking to Robert when Des Plaines police visited his home the following day, indicating he had seen two boys working at the pharmacy and that he had asked one of them, whom he believed to be Robert, whether any remodeling materials were present in the rear of the store. John promised to go to the police station later on that evening to make a statement, confirming this, indicating that he was unable to do so at the moment due to his uncle being dead. At 3:30 a.m., John, covered in mud, arrived at the police station claiming that he had been involved in a car accident. Upon returning to the police station later that day, John flatly denied any involvement in the disappearance of Robert and reported that he had not offered the boy a job. When asked why he returned to the pharmacy at 8 p.m. on December 11th, John claimed that he had done so in response to a phone call from Phil, informing him that he had left his appointment book at the store. Detectives had already spoken with Phil, who had stated that he had placed no such call to John. At the request of detectives, John prepared a written statement detailing his movements on December 11th. Des Plaines police were convinced John was behind Robert's disappearance and checked John's record, discovering that he had an outstanding charges against him in Chicago and served in prison sentence in Iowa for sodomy. A search in John's house on December 13th, 1978, ordered by the judge at the request of detectives, turned up several suspicious items: a 1975 high school class ring engraved with the initials JAS, various driver's license, handcuffs, books on homosexuality, a syringe, clothing too small for John, a 6 mm pistol, and a photo receipt from the pharmacy where Robert worked at. The police decided to confiscate John's mobile phone along with other PDM vehicles and assigned a 2-man surveillance team to follow John while they continued their investigation. The following day, investigators received a phone call from Michael Rossi, who informed the investigators both of Gregory Godzik's disappearance and the fact another PDM employee, Charles Hatula, had been found drowned in the Illinois River the previous year of 1977. On December 15, 1978, Des Plaines investigators obtained further details upon John's charge. Learning the complaint, Jeffrey Rignall had reported that John had lured him into his car, chloroformed him, sexually assaulted him, and dumped him, while he was suffering severe chest, facial burns, and rectal bleeding. In an interview with John's former wife the same day, they learned about the disappearance of John Bitkovich. The same day, the ring that was found had been traced back to a John Sizek. In this interview with John Sizek's mother, the same day, she informed the officers of the January 1977 disappearance of her son, and the several items from his apartment that were also missing, including a TV set. She added that the investigators had informed her the month following his disappearance that her son had apparently sold his satellite to John Gacy. Investigators noted that one of John Gacy's employee, Michael Rossi, drove a similar car to John Sizek's. A check confirmed the car driven by Michael had belonged to John Sizek. By December 16, 1978, John started to like and become friendly with the surveillance detectives, regularly inviting them to join him for meals in various restaurants and drinks in bar or his home. He repeatedly denied that he had anything to do with the disappearance and accused the officers of harassing him because of his political connections or because of his use of his recreational drugs. Knowing these officers were unlikely to arrest him for anything little of value, he openly taunted them. 2 days later, December 17, 1978, investigators conducted a formal interview of Michael Rossi, who informed them John Gacy had sold John Sizek's vehicle to him with an explanation that he bought the vehicle from John Sizek because the youth needed money to move to California. In the course of examining the car's trunk, the investigators discovered a small cluster of fibers, which may have been human hair. Officers conducted a test using 3 German Shepherd dogs to determine whether Robert had been present in any of John's vehicles. Their dogs were allowed to examine each of John's vehicles. The dog's handler informed investigators that the dog had a death reaction, which indicates the body of Robert had been present in the vehicle. In the early hours of December 18, 1978, John invited 2 of the investigating officers to a restaurant where over breakfast he talked about his business, his marriages, and his activities as a registered clown. At one point, John said to one of the 2 officers, and I quote, "You know, clowns can get away with murder." By December 18 of 1978, John was beginning to show visible signs of strain as a result of the constant surveillance. He was unshaven, looked tired, appeared anxious, and was drinking heavily. That afternoon, he drove to his lawyer's office to prepare a $750,000 civil suit against the Des Plaines police, demanding the police surveillance cease. The same day, the serial number of the Nissan Pharmacy photo receipt found in John's kitchen was traced to a Kim Byers, a colleague of Robert's at Nissan Pharmacy, who admitted, when contacted in person the following day, that she had worn the jacket and had placed the receipt in the pocket just before giving the jacket to George as he left the store to meet with this contractor. This revelation contradicted John's previous statement that he had no contact with Robert on the evening of December 11. The presence of the receipt indicated that John must have been in the contact with Robert after the youth had left the Nissan pharmacy on December 11th. On December 1978, investigators began compiling evidence for a second search warrant of John's house. The same day, John's lawyers filed a civil suit against Des Plaines police. The hearing was scheduled on December 22nd, 1978. John invited two surveillance detectives into his house. As one officer engaged John in a conversation, another attempted to note the serial number of the TV set, suspected to belong to John Cizik. While flushing the toilet, the officer detected a suspicious odor coming out from the heating duct, which had gone unnoticed during the previous search due to the cold temperature of the house. On December 20th, 1978, investigators interviewed David Cram. David recounted an incident where John displayed concern over mud on his carpet, suspecting it came from the crawl space. David also mentioned digging trenches at John's request, which matched the size of graves. On the evening of December 20th, John drove to his lawyer's office, appearing messy and requesting alcohol. He showed his lawyers a newspaper article about Robert's disappearance and said, and I quote, "This boy is dead. He's in a river." Later, John confessed to killing approximately 30 people. In a rambling confession, he exhibited erratic behavior, hinting at his impending arrest and confessing his crimes to friends and associates. Suspecting John might harm himself, police arrested him on drug charges to secure custody for further investigation. After being notified by law enforcement about the discovery of human remains in his crawlspace and the murder charges he would face, John expressed a desire to provide a full confession. In December 22nd, 1978, he began to disclose to the police about the chilling account of his crimes, spanning nearly a decade. John admitted to committing approximately 25 to 30 murders since 1972, revealing a pattern of preying on vulnerable young boys. The horrifying confession detailed the grim fate that awaited many of these individuals, who were subjected to unspeakable horrors before meeting their death. Some victims were found with cloth gags, forcibly lodged into their throats, suggesting a particularly sadistic method of execution. Following the commission of these heinous acts, John carelessly disposed the bodies, often burying them beneath his residence, in a crude attempt to conceal his crimes. When the crawl space became overcrowded, he resorted to disposing the bodies in the nearby Des Plaines River. Notably, John confessed to the murder of Robert Paste, shedding light on the events of that fateful evening and providing crucial information about the disposal of Robert's body. Additionally, he admitted to burning the remains of John Bitkovich in his garage, adding another layer of horror. In the heat of John's confession, law enforcement embarked on a painstaking search for the victim's remains, digging up a staggering number of bodies from his property between December 22nd and December 29 of 1978. The recovery effort extended beyond his residence, with additional victims discovered in nearby locations, including the Des Plaines River. As investigators painstakingly worked to identify these victims, they encountered a daunting task, with some individuals remaining unidentified to this day. John Gacy stood trial on February 6, 1980, facing charges for 33 murders in Cook County, Illinois. In the lead up to this trial, at the request of John's defense team, John spent over 300 hours undergoing psychological evaluation to assess his mental competence. Despite John's attempts to claim multiple personality disorder, his defense opted for a plea of not guilty by the reason of insanity, supported by psychiatric experts who diagnosed him as a paranoid schizophrenic with a multiple personality disorder. Contrary to the defense argument, the prosecution contended that John was mentally sound and fully responsible for his actions. They presented witnesses and evidence highlighting the plans behind his crimes, and efforts to avoid detection. Among these witnesses were former employees of John's company who testified about being pressured into digging trenches in his crawl space. In a dramatic moment, John wrote a letter to the judge requesting a mistrial, expressing dissatisfaction with his defense strategy and the police conduct. However, the judge allowed John the opportunity to testify if he wished. During the closing argument, the prosecution emphasized John's calculated actions and lack of remorse, while the defense painted him as a victim of uncontrollable compulsions. Ultimately, the jury deliberated briefly before finding John guilty on all counts of murder, sexual assault, and indecent liberties with a child. The following day, the prosecution sought the death penalty for each murder committed after the introduction of Illinois capital punishment statute. While the defense pleaded for life imprisonment, the jury sentenced John to death for the 12 murders, setting an execution date for June 2nd, 1980. After his sentencing, John was transferred to the Menard Correctional Center in Illinois, where he awaited execution on death row. During this time, he immersed himself in legal proceedings, studying law books and filing numerous appeals, however, without success. John maintained his innocence in many of the murders, claiming knowledge of only a handful. Despite John's legal battles, the Supreme Court of Illinois upheld his conviction in summer of 1984 and ordered his execution by lethal injection on November 14th that year. Appeals, including one to the Supreme Court of the United States in March of 1985, were unsuccessful. Finally, in October of 1993, after his last appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court was denied, the Illinois Supreme Court set May 10th, 1994 as John's execution date. Execution day arrived and John was transferred to the Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill. He spent the afternoon enjoying a private picnic with his family on the prison grounds before participating in a prayer with a Catholic priest that evening. Then escorted to the execution chamber, John received a lethal injection. The execution faced unexpected complications when the chemicals solidified, leading to a clogged IV tube. After rectifying the issue, the execution proceeded, lasting 18 minutes. Despite these difficulties, many considered John's death to be much easier than those of his victims. Reports indicate that John, diagnosed as a psychopath, showed no remorse for his crimes. His final statement to his lawyer emphasized that his execution would not compensate for the loss of others, and criticized the state for murdering him. His last words spoken were, and I quote, "Kiss my ass." Outside the correctional center, over 1,000 spectators gathered, with the majority in favor of the execution. Some wore t shirts referencing John Wayne Gacy's previous clown persona, Pogo the Clown, while others participated in an anti death penalty protests. After the confirmation of John's death at 12:58 a.m. on May 10th, 1948, his brain was removed for study by Dr. Helen Morrison. However, the studies revealed that no abnormalities were found upon examination. And there's the end to the story of Pogo the Clown, John Wayne Gacy. Tell me what you think about the episode and if any information is missing or changed. The links to the website where I've gathered information from will be in the description. Coffee42 is now available to listen on Apple Podcasts, so please make sure to check it out. Also, please recommend any topics you'd like to hear about next. And thank you for listening. Your support always helps with everything. Thank you.